were. And I'm like, well, why don't you say something about it? And he's like, well, I did. Did you hear what I just did there? I used the word like repeatedly. And as a result, it ended up making me sound kind of inarticulate and immature.
Now you can turn that.
All right.
You want me to do it?
No, I got it. And then I'm going to end that section. There are three main ways in which like tends to get used when it probably shouldn't. All right. Okay, ready? I'm like, am I supposed to be on the air? No, I'm not on. Not really on. Okay. I'm like, okay. All right. All right, just trying to figure out how to start that.
And that's why I don't do Jello shots anymore.
You don't? Ever? All right. All right. Hi. Earlier I was talking to this guy over here and he was supposed to cue me to, okay. Hi. I was just having a conversation with this guy over here and I was wondering when I'm supposed to start speaking in this video, and he's like, right now. And I'm like, well, why don't you signal me or something? And he's like, well, I did. And I'm like, well, I didn't see you. Did you hear what I just did? I used the word like repeatedly. And as a result, it probably made me sound kind of inarticulate and immature. It's a pretty common issue. If you or someone you know uses the word like, okay, everything was great, move on. Hi, I was talking to this guy over here a few minutes ago and I'm like, am I supposed to be recording right now? And he's like, yes, I signaled you. And I'm like, all right, well, why don't you raise your hand or something to let me know? And he's like, I did. Did you hear what I just did there? I used the word like repeatedly, and as a result, I probably ended up sounding kind of immature and inarticulate. If someone you know has mentioned to you that maybe you use the word like too much, or maybe you just noticed it yourself, well, the great thing about it is with just a little bit of information and a little bit of practice, this is a language issue that you can do something about.
Excuse me. I don't know what in the world that was. I'm sorry.
So earlier, okay. I'm going to just try to do it one more time. Hi. Earlier we were recording and I was like, okay. Hi. Earlier we were recording and I was talking to this guy over here and he's like, you're on. And I'm like, I'm on? Why don't you let me know? Why don't you give me a signal of some kind? All right. Hi. Earlier I was talking with this guy over here and Hi. Earlier I was talking with this guy over here and he said, you're on. And I'm like, I'm on? Why don't you give me some kind of hand signal or something? And he's like, I did. And I'm like, well, I didn't see it. Did you hear what I just did there? I used the word like repeatedly when I didn't need to. and I probably sounded a little bit immature and inarticulate. This is a pretty common issue for a lot of people. So if someone has mentioned to you that perhaps you use like too much, or maybe you've just noticed it yourself, the great thing about it is that with a little information and a little bit of practice, this is something you can do something about. There are three main ways in which like gets used when it probably shouldn't. That's good enough? Did that sound okay, that first part? Does it sound weird or stupid?
No, it was, I don't want to say cute, but...
Okay. But you heard me using like too much, right? Did the likes kind of stand out? All right. So now we're probably going to go... All right. Okay. First of all, the word like is often used as a synonym for about, or almost, or less than, or more than. The speaker isn't sure how long something occurred, or how large or small, or how near or far something is, and will say, "It took like 15 minutes," or "It was like 50 feet away." The like in those sentences could be avoided by saying, "It took about 15 minutes," or "It was about 50 feet away." Instead of saying or writing, "I studied for like 3 hours," we can use, "I studied for almost 3 hours," or "I studied for about 3 hours." So for this type of usage, like can be replaced with words like almost, or about, or more than, or less than, or a lot of other words that mean the same. But there's another way in which like gets used when it probably shouldn't. Okay? There we go. Another common use of like is when it replaces words such as said, asked, responded, and replied. For example, the speaker says, "I was like, 'I love your hair,' and she was like, 'Thank you.'" Now instead of "I was like, 'I love your hair,' we might try, "I said I love your hair," or "I told her I love your hair." We're using said or told instead of like. And instead of "she was like, 'Thank you," we can say "she said thank you," or "she replied, 'Thank you.'" So the second common usage of like occurs when we're using like instead of words like said, or replied, or responded, or stated. So that second main usage, okay, so that second main type of, okay, so the second way in which like gets used too much is when it's being used to replace words like said, or stated, or replied, or responded. And there's a third way in which like gets used. There's a third use of like that has very little meaning at all. It is an unnecessary filler word that could be removed from our sentences without replacing with anything. So the second main use of like that is unnecessary is when we're using it to replace words like said, or responded, or replied, or stated. But there's a third way in which like gets used unnecessarily, and that's when it's being used as a filler word simply because the speaker can't think of any other word to use. Okay. It is an unnecessary filler word that can be removed from our sentences without replacing it with anything. All right. So the second common usage of like is when we're using it instead of words like said, or stated, or replied, or responded. There's also a third usage of like in which that word is being used as a filler word. It's not doing anything. It's not replacing any other words. It could simply be removed from sentences without replacing it with anything else. For example, check out this sentence. "He was like standing there with a blank expression on his face." This is a case in which like isn't doing anything and can be removed. So instead of "he was like standing there," we end up with "he was standing there." In the sentence, "she was like really mad," we could simply remove the like and we'd end up with "she was really mad," or "she was mad." Okay, so now I'm going to discuss how harmful it is. Basically say, Okay, makes people sound immature and inarticulate. It's not necessarily going to cause somebody an opportunity to get a job, but people generally don't want to be regarded as immature and inarticulate. Give it a 70 out of 100. All right. All right. So how potentially harmful is it to use the word like too much? Well, a lot of people probably won't even notice. If I'm talking with people who use like too much, they probably won't notice and won't be offended by it. But in a lot of other environments, I'm likely to get a negative reaction. And the most commonly negative reaction is it makes someone sound kind of immature and inarticulate. And I've never met an adult who regards those things as compliments. We're never going to hear a 30-year-old woman saying, "Yeah, I love Jerome because he's so immature." Or, "Yeah, Terry, he is cool. He is so inarticulate." So we're not going to regard those types of Okay. So how harmful is it to use the word like too much? Well, in some environments where a lot of people are speaking that way, it's not likely to cause any problems whatsoever. In other environments, more professional situations, it's more likely to cause some harm. In a job interview, at a more professional workplace, if I'm using like too much, it's definitely going to make other people perceive me as somewhat immature and inarticulate. And I've never met an adult who thinks that's good. We're not going to hear a 30-year-old woman saying, "Yeah, I love Jerry, he's so immature." Or, "Yeah, that Fred, he's cool, he's so inarticulate." So, immature, inarticulate, not good. So if this is something that we know potentially could have a negative impact on us, it's not likely to be one of those things that costs us a job. So in a job interview, if I'm using the word like too much, potentially it could cause a negative reaction on the people who are interviewing me. Theoretically, it could have such a negative impact that I don't get hired. So it could have a harmful enough impact that it keeps me from getting certain types of professional jobs. I'd say most likely, though, it's just something that kind of annoys people, might not be the thing that keeps me from getting a job. We know it's potentially negative, may not cost me an opportunity to get a job, so we'd say it should probably, out of a range from 1 to 100, if we're going to rank this, how harmful is this type of error? Yeah. All right, it's not an error. Stick with me. You can't wait to be done with this. All right. All right, well, if we know that, okay. All right, so if we use like too much, the question might be this: well, how harmful